Hello there, and welcome to my video on copyright. My name is Jason Harden. I'm the Manager of Access Services at Coates Library here at Trinity University, and I am also the Campus Copyright Officer. So, having said that, let's dive right in. So first of all, let's define our key terms. What is copyright? Well, it's a legal guarantee on the part of the government to protect your interests in a piece of intellectual property that you have created. Well, the question then arises, what's intellectual property? It's anything that you create, artwork, literature, photographs, music, etc. But keep in mind that when we talk about copyright, we're not talking about patents or trademarks. Those are different kinds of intellectual property that are beyond the scope of this discussion. For something to be legally considered intellectual property, it has to be original, it has to be creative, and it has to be set in some kind of tangible medium of expression. That just means it has to be physically set down somewhere, on canvas, on film. If it's software, it has to be saved to some sort of drive or medium. If it's a statue, it has to be in bronze or clay or something like that. But the moment those three criteria are met, originality, creativity, and being in a fixed medium of expression, then your work is protected under copyright law. There's no need to register it with the U.S. Copyright Office, although that can be advantageous in the case of major commercial works. It's not actually necessary. Your copyright protection is instantaneous. So what are those rights that you retain under copyright law? Well, very broadly, you have the right to control the copying and redistribution of your work and to receive exclusive revenue from it, whether that revenue takes the form of publication and sales, tickets to public performances, licensing fees, etc. No one else can copy or share or especially profit from your creativity. You have the exclusive right to create and control derivative works also. Derivative works are works that derive substantially from a prior work. You build on an existing work. So for example, sequels, adaptations, reboots, translations, remixes, these are all works that because they derive so primarily from an earlier work, they are the exclusive copyright domain of the original creator. There's another kind of build upon work, however, and it's called a transformative work. And we'll touch on transformative works a little bit later in the video, but for now it's enough to note that a transformative work is one that expands on and changes an original work so creatively, so substantively, and so originally that it becomes its own new piece of intellectual property that belongs to the new creator rather than the original artist. So you might be asking yourself, why is all of this important? Why do we even have copyright laws? Why am I watching this video? Well, the idea of copyright goes back hundreds of years, and it even makes an appearance in the Constitution. So it's pretty important. The basic idea is that it incentivizes creativity. If you can rest assured that the government will support your claim to control your own intellectual property, you are more likely to spend time and money and energy in creating things that will make a positive impact on our culture. So, just as an example, no film studio is going to spend hundreds of millions of dollars creating a movie that they can't legally defend their rights to. And we all like movies. They contribute to our culture. So that's the idea behind copyright law. Sometimes people confuse copyright infringement and plagiarism. I see this a lot. There can occasionally be overlap, but they're not the same thing. Plagiarism is failing to give someone credit for their own creative ideas and work. Copyright, on the other hand, is a much more physical, mechanical sort of concept. It's about actually reproducing the content without permission, whether or not you attribute or fail to attribute. The two concepts can overlap, and this graphic will help illustrate the distinction. Now, we mentioned a few moments ago that copyright goes into effect the moment that your original creative work is fixed in a set medium of expression. But how long will that copyright protection last? Well, here's a big hint. Your entire life plus 70 years. That's a long time, huh? So now the question is, why on earth is the term of copyright protection so long? Over the years, I've heard some interesting answers to this question. Probably the most amusing was so that someone doesn't murder you for it. That's not actually it. The basic idea is that intellectual property is just that. It's property. And like any other kind of property, it can be bequeathed to someone. Like cash or investments or real estates or Aunt Gertie's jewelry or the pot of gold you have buried under your staircase. All of these things can be left to someone, and intellectual property, copyright, is no exception. Importantly, this affects heirs as well as corporations, museums, galleries. All of these entities can continue to enjoy copyright long after the original creator or creators are dead. There's a very interesting story that relates to Walt Disney and the Disney Corporation here that you might have already heard of. And I'm not going to relate it, but I will link in the description below to the Mickey Mouse Act in case you're curious about that. Now, what happens after the life plus 70 period? Well, the work enters what we call the public domain. This means that all of those exclusive rights that we talked about have forever and permanently expired. You can't renew, resubmit, reapply, transfer, or in any other way resuscitate copyright terms that have expired. Those works that are in the public domain have become the property of the world, and anyone can do anything with them that they want. They can adapt them, translate them, remix them, create sequels, etc. And this explains why there are so many stage productions and film adaptations of Shakespeare's works, for example. He's been dead way, way longer than any copyright law stipulates. And so his works are entirely in the public domain. They're the property of the world to do with as they wish. Just as a personal example, I like to dabble in digital art. I'm no good at it, but I enjoy it. It's fun to play around with. So let's say that I wanted to draw Hamlet in outer space, flying in a love-powered spaceship. Not only is the character Hamlet public domain, but I could probably find some original artwork that is in the public domain that could illustrate Hamlet, like a painting of Hamlet or something like that. And so that's just what I did. I created this wonderful piece of art with Hamlet flying around in his love-powered spaceship. So the bottom line there is public domain is awesome. Switching gears just a little bit, anytime we talk about copyright, the question of piracy and infringement lawsuits arises. This is a complex area, but I can summarize it by saying, don't pirate stuff. You can get caught, you can get sued, and while I don't want to get bogged down in the details, not only is it criminally illegal at certain thresholds, there are thorny ethical questions that surround it. So the bottom line is don't do it. Don't pirate copyrighted material. Sometimes students have asked me, well, how do I know what's piracy and what isn't? How do I know whether or not torrenting this particular file is infringement or isn't it? Well, the basic answer is this. If you are not the creator of the work, if you do not have the creator's permission to download the work or to share it, and if it is normally something that you would be expected to pay for. So, for example, a music album or a game on a gaming platform. If those conditions exist and you download it or share it, then that's probably piracy. But again, it depends on the situation. It's case by case. So if you have questions about that, feel free to ask me. So let's go back for a minute and touch on that transformative work idea that I've mentioned a couple times now. There is a set of guidelines in U.S. copyright law called fair use, which you probably heard of. And we'll explore that topic in more detail in just a minute, but for right now, I just want to mention that a transformative work falls into that category of fair use. It's a work that builds on the setting or the characters or the themes of another person's copyrighted work to such an extensive, original degree that it's no longer considered infringement. That new work is wholly new and distinct as a piece of intellectual property with exclusive rights held by the new creator. As an example of this, the rap group 2 Live Crew used a single lyric, not the music, just a lyric from the late Roy Orbison's song Pretty Woman in a song of their own of the same title. The Orbison's music publisher, and again, remember that just because Roy Orbison is dead doesn't mean that his copyrights are. Orbison's music publisher sued 2 Live Crew for copyright infringement over that usage of the lyric. The case went all the way to the United States Supreme Court, where it was decided that based on the very limited amount of the original work, and on the new creative context that 2 Live Crew had established, that the song was okay. It was indeed transformative. But where do we draw the line as to how much creative input is required to make a work legitimately transformative? It's very complicated and there are no clear parameters. Court cases hinge on subjective interpretation. So let's go back to me, for example, and my digital art hobby. Here's a rotoscope style illustration I did of my dog, Ollie, which is based on a photograph I took. Since I both took the photo and digitally painted over it, I'm unambiguously the rights holder here. There's no problem with that. But let's say I want to transform another work by incorporating digital Ollie in it. So here's a still frame from Richard Linklater's 2006 rotoscope film, A Scanner Darkly. If you'll notice on the right-hand side of the screen, I used software to put Ollie on the couch beside Winona Ryder. So would this resulting new image be considered transformative? Well, I would say not, because I haven't substantively changed the original work. All I've done is tweak it a little bit by including my dog. So how am I getting away with including this image in my video? Well, that's where the larger issue of fair use comes in. Fair use is the part of copyright law that carves out a general set of circumstances that allow you to engage in copying that, strictly speaking, might otherwise be considered infringement. There are 4 factors that the law spells out. First is the purpose of the copying. Non-profit copying that benefits the public in some way tends to be considered fair. This can include educational contexts, scholarly criticism, including satire and parody, or a non-profit organization's activities that generally benefit society. The second factor is the nature of the copyrighted work. This factor centers on the potential profitability of a given copyrighted work. Unpublished or creative works, like an author's first draft of a novel, are not very fair to copy from because they limit the rights holder's ability at some point to capitalize on his or her creation, which again is their exclusive right. The third factor is the amount and substantiality of copying. That stands to reason, right? The less that you copy from something, the better it is. But substantiality is a bit of a different concept. That describes how important the copied section is to the original work as a whole. Even if you're only copying a small amount, if that small amount represents the core of the work, you need to ask yourself, is it the most important piece? Am I effectively gutting the work by copying this? If that's the case, even though it's a small amount, it might not be considered fair, and that's what substantiality means in this context. And finally, the effect on the work's market value. This fourth factor dovetails with number 2. The more money that you potentially take away from a rights holder, the less likely your copying is to be considered fair. None of these 4 factors trumps the others. When infringement lawsuits arise, judges and juries tend to have to weigh them each individually and then collectively to come to a reasonable overall assessment of whether or not that copying was fair or not. So to summarize, fair use is a very powerful tool that citizens in all walks of life can take advantage of to facilitate a reasonable use of someone else's intellectual property. The story of fair use doesn't end with that, however. There are other ways to both use others' copyrighted works more easily, as well as to loosen up the standard of copyright restrictions on your own works so that others can use them more freely and be more confident in their own transformation of your copyrighted works. Chief among these alternatives is the set of alternate licenses offered by the Creative Commons. The Creative Commons is a nonprofit organization that has created a robust set of alternative copyright licenses that are more liberal than the default copyrights provided for under federal law. By applying a Creative Commons license to your work, you can allow others to remix, redistribute, or even use your creation in a commercial work of their own, all according to your preferences. If you go to creativecommons.org and click on Share Your Work, you can easily generate the license you want in a matter of just a couple minutes. The interface gives you a link, a CC symbol, and even the HTML code to embed the license in some sort of electronic content that you've created. These licenses are free to use and they are legally sound, and that means that they have been tested in court. So they've met that standard. The benefits of Creative Commons don't end there. I just described how you can apply a Creative Commons license to your own work, which is a generous decision to make on your part. But how can you take advantage of others' Creative Commons licensed works? Well, the website makes that easy. There's a Search the Commons engine under the Use and Remix section that allows you to look for CC licensed images in a wide variety of collections, including Google Images, DeviantArt, Flickr, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and Wikimedia Commons. If you're looking for CC licensed music, you can find it on SoundCloud or YouTube Audio Library, among others. So that's it. A broad survey of copyright in only a few minutes. If you have further questions, be sure to ask a librarian via the university's web link in the description field below. And thank you very much for watching. Take care.